Winter in Boston brought early darkness. Caroline Montgomery was reviewing the last quarterly report while looking down at the city lights from her high-rise office window. Caroline had made a name for herself as a respected investment analyst on Wall Street. She embodied the ideal career woman with her refined features and smart pantsuit, though her eyes held warmth. "Good work today. Shouldn't you be heading home?" Secretary Jenny peeked into the office with concern. The clock already showed 8 o'clock. "Yes, I should." "Thank you, Jenny." Caroline smiled as she closed her laptop and began packing documents into her bag. While she was passionate about her work, what she cherished even more was her warm home life. Thomas Williams, whom she had married 3 years ago, worked as a regular employee at a local bank. Though his position seemed modest compared to Caroline's career, his sincerity and kindness had completely captured her heart. "I'm sure there's a warm dinner waiting for me at home," she thought, feeling a warmth in her heart. Thomas was a good cook and always prepared something special on days when she worked late. When she opened the door to their home, the aroma of beef stew wafted from the kitchen, just as she'd expected. "I'm home, Thomas." "Welcome home, Caroline." Thomas greeted her in an apron and kissed her cheek. "You worked late again today. You must be tired." Caroline smiled as she took off her coat. "A little. But I feel better now that I'm home." Their house was in a quiet neighborhood in the Boston suburbs. Not too large, not too small, a home they had chosen together. It was a property Thomas couldn't have afforded on his salary, but Caroline had no reservations about covering most of the cost, saying, "It's our home." During dinner, Caroline listened to Thomas talk about his day. He spoke with interest about small happenings at work and interactions with customers. She loved these simple, everyday conversations. "By the way, Jennifer called today," Thomas said as he picked up his wine glass. Caroline frowned. Her relationship with her sister Jennifer was complicated. Despite having model-like beauty, Jennifer had no steady job and was financially dependent on their parents. She had always been spoiled by their parents and forgiven for everything. That hadn't changed since childhood. What did she say? "It's about a Hawaii trip your parents are planning. They want all of us to go next month." Caroline put down her fork. "This is the first I'm hearing of it." "Robert and Martha seem to want a vacation with the whole family," Thomas said gently, but Caroline couldn't help but smile bitterly. Her parents favored Jennifer, always spoiling her. With Caroline, however, they were strict, taking her success for granted and never even expressing gratitude. Still, Caroline had been looking after her aging parents for years, helping with their mortgage and medical expenses. "I see," she replied flatly. "And who's paying for it?" Thomas averted his gaze slightly. "Well, I haven't heard the details about that yet." "I understand," she said resignedly. "So I'll be paying in the end." Thomas took her hand. "Caroline, isn't that what family is about? Helping each other." Caroline nodded at her husband's words. That was certainly true. However, sometimes that helping felt very one-sided. Recently, she had noticed Thomas visiting her parents' home frequently. He explained it was to improve family relations, but something felt off. Especially since it seemed that conversations between Thomas and Jennifer were increasing. A trip to Hawaii. Caroline took a sip of wine and smiled. "All right. Maybe spending time with the whole family wouldn't be so bad." Thomas's face brightened. "I knew you'd say that. I'll let Jennifer know tomorrow." He stood up happily and headed toward the kitchen. The blue skies of Maui Island welcomed Caroline's family. At the upscale resort on Wailea Beach, the front desk woman greeted them with aloha and a smile. "The Montgomery Williams family reservation. We have an ocean view suite and 2 deluxe rooms prepared for you." As Caroline handed over her credit card, she saw her mother Martha smiling with satisfaction. As expected, Caroline was paying for everything. Still, believing that time spent together as a family was precious, she tried to maintain a cheerful demeanor. "Thomas, could you bring the luggage?" When Caroline called to her husband, he was deep in conversation with Jennifer. When they saw her approaching, they abruptly stopped talking. "What were you talking about?" Caroline asked with a smile. "Oh, just activities," Thomas answered, seeming a bit flustered. "Jennifer was saying she's interested in snorkeling." Jennifer nodded. "Yes, isn't it wonderful underwater?" Caroline sensed an odd atmosphere between them but nodded. "Yes, it's wonderful." After putting their luggage in their rooms and getting settled, they decided to have a late lunch at the hotel restaurant. From the terrace seats, they had a view of the brilliant blue ocean. "This is lovely," Martha exclaimed. "Caroline, thank you so much for making this trip possible." It was a rare expression of gratitude from her mother. Caroline was a bit surprised but replied, "You're welcome." Jenny needed a little break, Robert, her father, explained. "She's been emotionally unstable lately. This Hawaii trip should cheer her up." "That's right," Martha agreed. "Jenny is a special child, she needs special care." Caroline couldn't help but frown. They always called Jennifer a special and treated her with excessive protection. Meanwhile, Caroline's struggles and successes were seen as expected. "You agree, don't you, Thomas?" Robert asked, turning to Caroline's husband. "Of course," Thomas answered immediately. "Jennifer needs time to relax." Caroline felt a slight unease at her husband's words. Since when had Thomas become so concerned about her sister? They hadn't been particularly close before. That night, Caroline was on the balcony sipping wine and gazing at the ocean. Thomas was in the shower, leaving her alone in the room. Her phone rang with a message notification. It was a casual greeting from Jennifer, looking forward to the beach party tomorrow. Caroline started to reply but her fingers froze. Somehow she couldn't shake the feeling that something was hidden behind these simple words. The next morning, the family was set to spend the day at the beach. However, during breakfast, Thomas suddenly stood up. "I'm sorry, but I just got an urgent call from the bank," he said, appearing somewhat uneasy. "I need to deal with a work issue. It might take a few hours." "While in Hawaii?" Caroline asked suspiciously. "Aren't you on vacation?" "Well, yes, but it's an important client issue." Thomas avoided meeting her eyes. "I'll be back soon." After he left, Caroline said to her parents, "Isn't that strange? It's hard to imagine an emergency at Thomas's job that would require attention during vacation." "You're too suspicious, Caroline," Martha sighed. "Always expecting the worst. That's your problem." "Mother's right," Jennifer agreed. "Thomas is just responsible. He's a good man." Caroline nodded silently, but anxiety was growing inside her. She took out her phone and called Thomas's company. "First National Bank, how may I help you?" a receptionist answered. "Hello, this is Thomas Williams' wife. I'd like to get in touch with him." "Mr. Williams," the woman thought for a moment before answering. "According to our records, he's on vacation this week. There are no urgent matters that I'm aware of." "I see, thank you." Caroline hung up. Her heart began to race. Thomas had lied. But why? And where was he and what was he doing? By lunchtime, Thomas had not returned. Caroline sat on the terrace, trying to participate in the conversation. Her parents and Jennifer were chatting happily, as if Thomas's absence didn't concern them at all. "Jennifer, that's your phone notification," Caroline said, noticing a sound coming from her sister's bag. Jennifer hurriedly reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. Caroline caught a glimpse of a message displayed on the screen. "All set for today?" The sender's name was T. Jennifer quickly pressed the phone to her chest, saying, "It's nothing. Just some travel consultation." "From whom?" Caroline asked, trying to appear calm. "Just a tour guide," Jennifer blushed slightly. "He's looking into some options for us." Caroline nodded quietly. She tried not to show her emotions. However, inside, a storm was beginning to rage. T was almost certainly Thomas. And what preparations were they referring to? If Thomas says he's going out alone tomorrow, I'm going to follow him, Caroline suddenly decided. What are you saying, Caroline? Martha exclaimed. Following your husband is insane. You should trust him. Mother is right, Caroline, Jennifer said persuasively. You're being paranoid. But Caroline's intuition was urging her to seek the truth. Something was fundamentally wrong. And she needed to know what it was. If nothing is being hidden, then there's no problem, Caroline said quietly. As the morning sun turned Maui's ocean golden, Caroline was already awake. She had barely slept all night. Watching Thomas's sleeping face beside her, she had been planning her day. At breakfast, Thomas was nervously checking his phone. Sorry, I have another work errand today. Again? Caroline asked calmly. What kind of errand? Well, there's a problem I couldn't resolve yesterday, he was evasive. I need to go out for a bit. I'll be back by afternoon. Caroline looked at her parents and Jennifer. They said nothing, continuing their meal as if they had expected this. Thomas, she said quietly. If you're lying, tell me honestly now. What are you talking about? Thomas frowned. I'm just going to work. Robert cleared his throat and interrupted. Caroline, trust your husband. Being suspicious isn't good. That's right, Martha agreed. You always expect the worst. That's why you can't be happy. Caroline closed her mouth but was determined inside. She nodded silently and continued eating breakfast. After Thomas left, she told her parents, I'm going shopping. Her parents looked relieved and said, have fun. Jennifer showed an unnatural smile and added, hope you find some nice souvenirs. Caroline disguised herself with sunglasses and a cap. By the time she left the hotel, she could still see Thomas. He was walking quickly down the beach road toward a taxi stand. Caroline quickly caught another taxi and asked the driver, please follow that car. Playing detective, ma'am, the older driver raised an eyebrow. Is that a problem? Caroline responded coldly. Not at all, the driver shrugged. Not uncommon in Hawaii. It's a romantic place, all sorts of drama happens. They followed Thomas's taxi to the northern part of the island. About 20 minutes later, Thomas got out in front of a small white church. A sign reading, McKenna Chapel, was visible. Please wait here, Caroline told the driver, handing him cash. I'll be right back. She hid a short distance from the church and watched Thomas enter the chapel. When he disappeared, Caroline slowly approached the church. She could faintly see inside through the chapel windows. Caroline's heart was pounding, and her hands were shaking. She took a deep breath and quietly entered through a side door. The sight she witnessed left her frozen. Jennifer, dressed in a white wedding gown, stood before the altar. Next to her was Thomas in a tuxedo. They were holding hands as a man who appeared to be a minister was reading something. In the front row of the church sat Caroline's parents. Happy smiles adorned their faces. Caroline hid in the shadow of a wall and leaned forward slightly to hear their voices. She doesn't know, right? Jennifer's anxious voice could be heard. Don't worry, relax, Thomas answered as he held her hand. She doesn't suspect a thing. She's so oblivious she won't notice, Martha laughed. Caroline's head is always full of work. She can't even imagine our plan. What happens after the wedding? Robert asked. First, I'll ask for a divorce and get half of Caroline's assets. Her pride is so high that she'll give in without a fight. Thomas's voice was cold and calculating. Then we'll move to New York. I have shares in her company too, so if things go well, I might even get on the board. And we won't have to worry about our old age, Martha said happily. Caroline won't abandon us, so if we share her wealth, our remaining years are secure. When your remarriage to Jennifer becomes public, it will damage Caroline's reputation at her company, Robert added. Then she won't be able to resist us. Caroline's body was trembling, but her eyes were cold and clear. She took out her smartphone and began recording the conversation. Then she quietly filmed the ceremony. "What do you think Caroline is doing right now?" Jennifer asked with a giggle. "Probably sitting idly at the hotel," Thomas shrugged. "She thinks she's smart, but she's actually easy to fool. That's why I married her." A cold anger spread through Caroline's heart. But no emotion showed on her face. Her analyst's mind was already planning her next move. Once she determined she had gathered enough evidence, she quietly left the church. She returned to the waiting taxi and said, "Please take me back to the hotel." "Are you all right?" The driver looked at Caroline in the back seat with concern. "You look pale." "Yes, I'm fine," Caroline replied calmly. There was no tremor in her voice. "I just need to make some changes to my life plans." Back at the hotel, Caroline entered her room and locked the door. She sat on the bed and reviewed the recordings and photos she had collected. Everything was clear. Her husband, sister, and parents had all betrayed her. In Caroline's head, a cool analysis began. She opened her laptop and started writing emails. The first was to her lawyer friend, Judith Harris. "Judith, I need urgent legal advice. I have evidence of my husband's infidelity and fraudulent actions. Please review the attached files. Prepare divorce proceedings on the most favorable terms possible. Also, please advise me on how to legally stop financial support to my parents." The next email was to her private banker, "Tom, please urgently move all assets in my name to accounts unknown to my family. Also, prepare the documents to initiate the sale of our home. I will explain the details upon my return." Finally, she emailed the HR director, Lisa, "For personal reasons, I need to return from vacation earlier than planned. I'll be taking the first flight back to New York tomorrow morning. I'll return to normal duties next Monday." After sending all the emails, Caroline opened her suitcase and began packing only the essentials. Her movements were mechanical and efficient. There was no time for tears of sadness or anger. Now was the time for action. Caroline smiled quietly. They had underestimated her. Neither her family nor her husband knew how calm and calculating she could really be. They didn't understand why she was called the sharpest investment analyst on Wall Street. "You chose the wrong person to cross," she whispered. Turning her back to the beautiful Maui ocean visible from the window, Caroline began preparing her revenge. In her heart, there was sadness for the people she had once loved, but even stronger was her determination. The determination to make them pay for their betrayal. Caroline left Hawaii before dawn. She left a short note at the front desk addressed to "My family, had to leave early for urgent business. Enjoy your vacation." Just that cold message. On the plane to New York, Caroline stared out the window at the clouds, hardening her heart as she formulated her plan. Her mind was calm and clear. The analytical skills and decisiveness she had cultivated as a top investment analyst were now shaping her revenge. When the word revenge crossed her mind, she was a bit surprised. She hadn't thought she would harbor such emotions. But she told herself this wasn't just emotional retaliation, but seeking just compensation for betrayal. Upon arriving at her Boston home, Caroline immediately took action. Her movements were efficient. First, she met face-to-face with Judith Harris, the best divorce attorney. "This is complete fraud," Judith declared after seeing the recordings and photos from Hawaii. "Legally, it could even be considered attempted bigamy. We can proceed with divorce on the most favorable terms." "Thank you, Judith," Caroline answered calmly. "I also want to stop financial support to my parents." "That's possible too," Judith showed her documents. "Your assistance to your parents was provided without legal contracts, so it can be stopped at any time." Caroline also met with the private banker and changed access to all joint accounts, moving assets to separate accounts unknown to Thomas and her family. Using her knowledge as an economic analyst, she also began procedures to legally block access to her parents' retirement pensions. The price for trying to use my life will be high, Caroline determined. Next, she arranged for movers. Following her instructions, they moved most items from the house to a new storage location. Memorable photos, expensive furniture, art collections they had gathered together, she took everything. Leave everything Thomas chose, she coldly instructed. In reality, there was almost nothing. After all, she had created most of their home life. After the movers left, she wrote just one word, in red paint on the empty wall. The word looked like a scream from her heart. She also knew that her parents valued social reputation above all else. So she organized all the evidence of her father's affairs, her mother's false charity activities, and tax evasion. These were family secrets she had known about and kept quiet for years. Just as they didn't care about my reputation, I won't care about theirs, Caroline said to herself. Finally, she contacted a local real estate agent and initiated procedures to sell the house. I want to be free from this place of betrayal as soon as possible, she said. When all preparations were complete, Caroline moved to a new apartment. She told no one her new address, completely erasing her traces. And she waited for the day Thomas and the others would return from Hawaii. That day, she was working normally in her office. While analyzing numbers on the screen, she occasionally checked her cell phone. Finally, a message arrived from Judith. They've arrived at the house. Everything is proceeding according to plan. Caroline smiled quietly and returned to work. When Thomas, Jennifer, and her parents returned from Hawaii, a shocking sight awaited them. Opening the front door, they first saw an empty house with written large on the wall. Cautiously proceeding to the living room, they found only a heavy wooden table remained, with divorce papers and property division documents neatly arranged on it. And Judith, Caroline's lawyer, stood there in an expensive suit with a cold expression. What's happening? Asked a bewildered Thomas, to whom Judith calmly explained. Ms. Caroline Montgomery knows everything. Including the ceremony in Hawaii, she said as she played the photos and recordings from the chapel on a tablet. Jennifer turned pale, and her parents were speechless. Where is she? Thomas asked frantically. We need to talk. You no longer have a say, Judith coldly retorted. Miss Caroline will not return to your lives. This is the last encounter. On the table were also legal documents showing that Caroline had emptied all family joint bank accounts and had begun procedures to sell the house. This is a legitimate response to fraudulent acts, Judith continued. Miss Caroline has withdrawn all retirement funds for her parents. It's clear that you needed her assistance for mortgage and medical expenses. Arrangements had also been made for the parents' hidden debts and economic problems to become public in their community. Evidence of your improprieties in charity work and tax evasion is ready to be submitted to authorities, Judith calmly announced. However, the disclosure of this information may change depending on your actions from today forward. Further, it was revealed that Thomas and Jennifer's marriage was legally invalid. Bigamy by a married person is not legally recognized. This is an act that could be subject to criminal penalties, it was explained, causing the blood to drain from Thomas's face. I want to talk to Caroline, Martha said in a trembling voice. She's our daughter. Unfortunately, she no longer thinks so, Judith replied matter-of-factly. Let me convey her words, blood relation is a coincidence, but betrayal is a choice. Thomas showed his anger. I won't let her get revenge. I have rights too. On that point, please look at this, Judith showed another document. It was a notice from the HR department of Caroline's company. There had been an inquiry about Thomas's employment at the bank, reporting that there were serious questions about his integrity. Your position at the bank is also in jeopardy, Judith calmly informed him. If you choose to fight further, Ms. Caroline is prepared to release all evidence. When they tried to object, 2 security guards appeared and notified them to remove remaining possessions and vacate the house within 24 hours. The house was already in the process of being sold. Thomas and the family realized that their plan had completely backfired, and they were at a loss. Their future plans had crumbled in an instant, and now they were in dire straits both financially and socially. That night, Caroline was drinking wine on the balcony of her new apartment, looking up at the starry sky. There was pain in her chest, but also a sense of liberation. She had chosen to live honestly with herself. Her cell phone rang. It was from Judith. "It's all over," the lawyer informed her. "They've agreed to the terms. They'll leave without a fight." "Thank you," Caroline answered quietly. After hanging up, she exhaled deeply. 2 years later, in a Manhattan high-rise, Caroline Montgomery, as vice president of a major investment firm, looked down at the city from her large glass office. The view of skyscrapers visible from the window symbolized her new life. On her desk were photos with new friends, and on the wall hung certificates honoring her achievements. "Ms. Montgomery, preparations for the board meeting are complete," the secretary called. "Thank you, Allison," Caroline smiled as she organized her documents. After the divorce, she had returned to her maiden name. Caroline shone more brightly than before. She spent time with a psychological counselor once a week, learning to value herself. With the counselor's help, she was able to face and overcome the pain of the past. "True strength is having the courage to stand up," she had written in her diary. Before heading to the meeting, she glanced at a newspaper clipping in her desk drawer. It was an article about her ex-husband and family. In a small apartment in the Chicago suburbs, Thomas was returning from yet another interview, wearing a cheap suit. He opened the door with heavy steps and muttered, "Failed again." Since his divorce from Caroline, his career had been on a downward trajectory. He had lost credibility, and his reputation in the banking industry had plummeted. Next to him was Jennifer, who now worked as a supermarket cashier. Her once beautiful face was clouded with fatigue and regret. What were we thinking then? She had asked herself many times. Caroline's parents also faced harsh reality. Having lost financial support, they had to move to a modest apartment for the elderly. Furthermore, their social reputation had completely collapsed due to the disclosure of secrets in their community. Former friends had distanced themselves, and they were facing a lonely old age. There was a knock on Caroline's office door. "Come in," she answered, and a man with a warm smile peeked in. "I came to confirm our lunch date before the meeting," Michael Harrison smiled at her. He was a university professor she had met at her investment seminar a year ago, and now her new partner. "Of course, I haven't forgotten," Caroline returned his smile. His presence gave her peace. That weekend, Caroline was hosting a barbecue party in the garden of her new home. Surrounding her was the family she had chosen, friends who truly valued her. Next to her stood Michael, sending her warm glances. "Let's make a toast," Caroline raised her glass. "To a new chapter in life." She smiled quietly. Caroline had finally understood. True family isn't about blood relations, but relationships where people respect and support each other. She hadn't completely forgiven her parents or Thomas, but she had learned from their betrayal and become stronger. "We can choose to walk through life with people who know and respect our value," she told her friends. "Blood ties are a coincidence, but real bonds are a choice." Caroline's new life began when she chose to know her worth and build genuine relationships. From the ashes of betrayal, she had found herself and true happiness.